Every time we try to set boundaries with our son, it turns into a long debate. He wants explanations for everything and argues every point until we're exhausted and we start to question ourselves. We end up over explaining just to keep the peace. How do we set boundaries without getting pulled into constant arguments? That was a question that was asked recently, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about things that parents need to stop doing when their adult child is stuck. Now, let me explain something here. This is not about blaming parents. This is about understanding why things are happening. Why, despite all your effort, all your concern, all your support, nothing seems to be changing. So we want to know what might be getting in the way that you are not realizing. And these points they're really sticking points. We're talking about being unstuck. Well, these are some things that I see that happen. It's really in the interaction between adult children and parents, whether it's addiction or just a general lack of motivation. But it's these little moments, these little interactions where they're getting stuck, and a lot of times they don't realize the trap that they're getting stuck in. So that is what we're going to talk about tonight. And here's my tissue. I have been getting over a cold, and I'm going to say it one time because when I used to take some speech classes back in the day, I remember they'd always say, if you got something going on like a cold or something like that, apologize once and then just go with it. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. And if I'm wiping my nose, I'm wiping my nose. But we are going on because that's how much I care about this group and I want to help. So whether you're watching this live or as most people are on replay, you are welcome. This is a place for support and it's a place for learning, right? This is a no shame zone. And I'm glad that you are watching at whatever point. If you happen to be watching live, if you have a question, if you have something to say, if you want to talk, if you want to interact, that's what we're doing. So this is a great time to do it. Put your comment in there, put your response just in the chat under this video, and we will get going with it. Okay. So back to that question, and that's really what I was going to do tonight is just kind of focus on some questions that highlight some of these sticking points that I see. So they're basically saying every time they try to set a boundary, their son makes this really long debate and he wants explanation after explanation. He wants to know reason after reason. And the parents that at some point they start questioning themselves, like, what are we doing here? Are we losing our minds or are we going the wrong direction here? And it turns into big arguments. I see this all the time. And there's many reasons it happens. But I want to give you some ways to get out of that pattern. I most recently was talking with a family that they were in this pattern, and it was an argument about their son who was really just sitting around doing nothing, and I believe he was certainly on his devices all the time, possibly addicted to the internet and that kind of stuff. And he was just sitting around a bunch, and they're like, you have to get a job. They had talked about it like, you have to get a job. And he'd make this argument, but I'm taking classes. I'm taking college classes. I don't have time for a job. That'll mess things up. Why would you want me to get a job? And now the reality of it is taking classes was like taking the most basic general ed class, one of them, just a few hours a week, if that was required. And the rest of the time was just sitting around. So he really wasn't that busy, but the parents would get pulled into these long debates and arguments about, look, you're sitting around all the time. One class doesn't count. And you're like, well, I'm going to take more classes next time. And a job's just going to keep me from being able to focus. And they would go around and around and around. And there's a couple points I want to make about this. One, you don't want to get pulled into explaining and justifying what is reality. And I know this can be a tricky line, but a lot of times what is happening there is the the person who is delaying, the young adult, your child in that situation, a lot of that argument is either about they are trying to preserve some sense of self-esteem, right? They just don't want to look, we've talked about denial a lot in here. They don't want to look at the reality of what they're doing, and so they're justifying and arguing to save face, if that makes sense. And the other reason is they're really just trying to stay in the same pattern, right? And they don't want to do the thing. They don't want to follow through with the job, or cutting back on substances, or not spending money in a certain way, or whatever it is, whatever the boundary's about. Now, that might seem manipulative, and sometimes it is, right? They are intentionally. I believe me, I know this as a proven strategy that many children, young adults have done. Is I'm going to keep arguing and arguing until I wear my parents down. They give up. I get them stuck in a loop. Like I'm gonna talk them through until they say something that doesn't quite make sense, and I'm gonna nail them to the wall on it. All of this just to get them off my back. That stuff happens, and I'm not saying that's okay. Not justifying it. What I'm saying is that gets you into that pulls you into the trap. Now, I do want to make another point. I feel like I'm making a point on a point on a point, but this all fits together. I have been talking about the importance of understanding what is underneath your child's resistance, right? Even when their goal and their strategy is to get you to back off, is to avoid consequences, is to not deal with reality, there's a bigger why beyond that. Right. And so I want to pull you back to a teaching. It was a 10-minute video that is on, it's pinned in this group, and it's also in my Facebook page as well. And it's about 5 conversations. It's about the way you need to talk through these situations with your adult child to get unstuck. Call them the 5 unstuck conversations. And a big part of those conversations, the way they start, is it shows you how to connect with your child, and then to understand what is underneath their anxiety, their insecurities, their trauma, the panic that they're having, that results in all of these stuck behaviors, all these avoidant behaviors that are happening. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But when it comes to the actual interaction that's happening, I see parents, they're just going over and over the same points, justifying, explaining, and I say to them, that's not going to work, right? You need to stay focused on when you're asserting a boundary and talking about reality. That's what you need to stay on. So in this case, it's not about uh, the merits of getting a job, or how harmful the internet use is, or how much they actually are. It's more about the result. They need to move forward. And then many times the boundary is not a negotiation, it's a choice, right? Or they have a choice, right? It's, hey, either you get the job and you're filling up your day, more of your time, however you want to define it, and things are good, we're moving forward, or you're not. And then that's where there's usually some form of reality that you allow to come in. Like, we're not going to pay for this anymore. We're not going to we're not going to pay for classes that you're not completing, or whatever it is. But then there needs to be the follow through with that. So there's there's a couple of things. I think I'll just give you some bullet points, and then there's 2 more questions that I want to read, and then I'll respond to anyone who has anything now or later that you want to put in the comments. But yeah, so the first point, if you're taking notes, is that you want to stop explaining and justifying behavior. Right? That just turns into debates, and it's not growth. And when, all right, and here's a sticking point I see with that with parents. They have this belief if they can get their child to agree with them that things are going to change, right? And then it becomes kind of like a control battle. And your child honestly has the upper hand in that, right? I need you to agree with me that this is the right thing to do and it makes sense to you and you see my logic and how wise I am as a parent. And once that they get to that point of agreement, everything's going to change. And some parents will go to an extreme to control them with threats or just endless debating and badgering about a point until a kid says, "Yeah, yeah, you're right, you're right," but they don't really mean it. And it didn't deal with what was underneath, what was really holding them back, where they're really stuck. So the agreement doesn't lead to change. And often that comes back to parents where they're feeling even more furious because you see the logic of this, you agreed to this, but then you didn't follow through because we didn't address the main thing that was going on with them. And then the other thing is sometimes parents feel like if they understand what the their child's stuck point is, that it will remove the responsibility, right? If I get too empathetic and I understand why you're struggling, then I'm not going to be able to follow through. And that's not true. Understanding is about connection and support to help them move forward. So it doesn't mean that you're removing the responsibility. Uh, so that whole pattern of trying to explain and justify and then making that the goal, it doesn't work. And like I said, your kid is in this perfect position to say, I'm not going to understand. I'm not going to agree with you. And then the power struggle ensues until someone gives up, someone gives in, or someone gets hurt. And that's just never a good pattern. So we want to stay focused on the boundaries and the choices, the reality of the situation. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we get into this. But the other point that we're going to get into is to stop rescuing from emotional discomfort. We talked a lot about that last week. It's a form of enabling that parents don't realize is enabling, but we don't want them to feel anxious. We don't want them to feel angry. We feel that we want to protect them from just the sadness of whatever is happening. And that becomes one of the sticking points as well. And then the other one that we're going to cover is stop waiting for your child to become motivated before you set limits. This idea of like, okay, I'm going to wait to this moment where they're well rested and they're motivated, they want to take action, and then we're going to set the goals, we're going to jump in, and that moment never comes, or it comes and it's gone as quickly as it happens. Let me read another question. Our son uses marijuana daily and insists that it's not a problem because it's legal and not addictive. He says his real issues are stress, anxiety, and a lack of motivation, not the substance. Whenever we bring it up, he tells us we're overreacting and don't understand. We don't want to label him or push him away, but it's clearly affecting his drive and responsibility. How do we respond when he argues that the substance isn't the problem? Well, this is such a classic argument, at least in the many, many times that I've sat with parents in these situations, that it's almost predictable how this argument is going to go for me anyway. Um, and to give that kid credit, your son who you're talking about here is he's right and he's not right. That there probably is a lot of anxiety and stress and these underlying issues, and he's using marijuana daily to cope, to escape, to not feel anxious. But daily marijuana use is going to impact his motivation. In fact, they said that somewhere in their question, that it was clearly affecting him, his motivation. And so this is a classic example of not getting into arguing whether or not marijuana should be legal, whether or not it's harmful, whether or not so and so uses it and okay is okay, or this person is famous, and I mean, look at Snoop Dogg, and it will go on and on and on, and it misses the whole point. And the big point in that question that I see is that he is not motivated. He is not moving forward. He is not taking responsibility. And the parents are dancing on eggshells around him, right? They said that. How do we do this without him feeling badly about himself and pushing him away? He's clearly not moving forward. And that's the discussion I have with young adults and teenagers and anyone really that wants to argue that. I'm like, I don't care about legality of the substance. I don't care about, I'm aware, but I don't care as much about all the medical effects and which substance is the worst and most harmful and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. The point is, how are you doing? How is your life going? How well are you functioning? What are your dreams? What are your goals? What do you want to do with your life? And what is happening right now? And you stay focused on the dream. That's what I try to get parents to do. Stay focused on the dream. Stay focused on the bigger goal, because the whole argument here is deflecting from that, right? And they didn't put the specifics of what was going on, but it could be like, hey, you're never making rent, and we're having to pay that for you, or you're never getting out of the home. You're not finishing things. You're not working. You're not being productive. Your relationships are falling apart. You're isolating yourself, and you say that with compassion, not shame, but it's a look at reality, and that's a no go. So it's really about how we gonna move forward, and moving forward, the things that are causing your son to be stuck are going to become obvious. And he can debate it all day, but you stay focused on the outcomes, because there's this breaking point. I'm going to try to describe this. There's this breaking point when you can lovingly, caringly stay focused on the outcomes and what is happening, the functioning, and whether or not you're moving to the goals, and you're not getting caught up in this stuff. When you're staying compassionate and saying, "We love you, we care about you," but it's still not happening. It's still not happening. It's still not happening. How can we make it happen? Right? There's this point where uh, it becomes painfully obvious what is holding someone back, whether that's mental health issues, uh, their self-esteem, image, the behaviors, their escapism. That stuff is going to come out when the conversation stays on the right thing. So that's a big point with this. And so it's let's stay focused on the goal. Let's stay very caring and connected, and not get pulled into these arguments. And maybe if I can elaborate or over elaborate on that a little bit, it's those moments of like, um, I'm sorry this is so hard for you. I'm sorry you haven't been able to move forward. I'm sorry that that it's so difficult for you to get this job or whatever it is. But we're here for you, and we still need to get this done. That's what really matters, and you stay on that point and not get pulled into that trap. Um, I think I made that point 7 times. All right. Another question. Let's see here. Pulling up here. Our 22-year-old, doesn't say male or female, our 22-year-old keeps saying they'll make change when he feels ready. We're afraid that if we push too hard, he'll shut down or spiral, but waiting hasn't helped either. Months go by and nothing changes. How do we stop waiting for motivation without feeling like we're being too harsh? How do we stop waiting for motivation without feeling we're being too harsh? Okay, I had to read that twice in the way it was worded. Um, this is where that point of enabling by protecting from emotion, rescuing from difficult feelings, difficult realities come in. That was in that last question as well. And I hear parents say that so much is we don't want to tear them down. We don't want them to, to be overwhelmed. And what that turns into is let's protect them from the real conversation or let's like stay in this position of how can we make soften reality. And most of these situations, really all of them in some way, are a difficult conversation. There's something that is going to be difficult to talk about and to work on. And so you got to be careful with that idea that we want to just remove all the struggle out of it because that's many times exactly what they need. They need to face the struggle and work through the struggle. And I think the biggest point in this question that is coming out to me is about waiting for them to get motivated, right? That idea that they're going to have this moment where they get motivated. What he says in his question, he says, let me pull it back up. When he feels ready, he'll make changes when he feels ready. Like what does that even mean, right? It's a stall, it's a stuck, that's another way of him saying I'm too anxious, I'm too overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. And the idea of waiting is not going to work. Waiting is staying in a place of I can't do it. Staying in a place of waiting is this is too hard and I don't believe there's a way for me to move forward right now. It's waiting for a miracle. It's waiting for, sometimes I say, I feel like you're waiting for like this lightning bolt or this angel from heaven to come down and say, you will do this, and here is your motivation. And, they're waiting for this moment, and then parents are hoping this moment will come. And even when they bring them to counseling, right? That like, all right, just going to counseling, like talking with me is going to bring the change. Well, it's a start, but what I say is it's action. Action creates motivation, right? And it's not the other way around, right? You don't wait and get motivated and take action. That's not how it's going to happen. So it's all about the boundaries. It's all about the steps. It's all about the small steps. Again, in those 5 unstuck conversations, that's towards the end of them. I think it's number 4. We talk about the plans and the action steps and how you find that balance between something that is too big of a step and the right step, or well, too big of a step, too little of a step, or no step, and finding what's an achievable step and moving forward. While I'm talking about this, I hear this also from the young adults I talk to. They say, uh, well, how do I know it's the right step? How do I know this is going to lead me to where I want to go? And that's a sticking point for them and sometimes for the parents. Right? And I tell them the worst step is not taking a step, right? Any step you take, any movement, anything you try is the right direction. Even if you start off in a very different direction, right? You can correct, you can move. It's the process of moving. It's the process of momentum. Once you get moving, you can correct, right? You can picture a car, right? If you start driving the kind of the wrong way, you can turn and you can bring it back around to where you need to be. And if you if you overcorrect this way, you can bring it back in. But if the car is just sitting there, right? You're not doing nothing, right? You're not getting closer to anything. Even if you go at a 45-degree angle, right? You're getting closer to where you need to be. And it's that process where you learn where the line is. I'm full of metaphors. I'm full of analogies. But it's got to be that action. So let me review a couple of things here. Just in what we talked about and the sticking points that I see that families and young adults get into. One is that pattern of getting pulled into arguments, right? we need to be in agreement. I need to explain and I need to justify why you need to do this, and I need you to agree. That's a trap, right? You got to stay focused on the goals and stay focused on the steps. And and then remember that just because you understand why they're struggling, it doesn't mean that they don't move forward with their responsibilities. Um, and then number two, we talked about to stop rescuing from emotional discomfort, right? The fact that they are they're angry, they're sad, they're right. That doesn't mean you're not compassionate, kind, understanding. It's that the goal is not to remove that stuff. So every time they get anxious, that doesn't mean you back down. It means you push in with more connection, right? When they get angry, right? You have some empathy about how hard this is and how much they don't want to do it, right? You don't back down and you don't come back with more anger. Right? And then another one is big one is stop waiting for the motivation to set goals, to set some steps, some baby steps, to have some limits, right? It's the action first. That's what you want to start with, right? I know that in your particular situation, it feels so much more complicated than these simple points, but these are fundamental sticking points. And if you look at what is happening in your interactions and your process with your young adult, I'm guessing you're going to see one or all of these that are happening in some way. So here's a question as we're closing. What is one thing that you are going to try to do different this week? A different way you're going to communicate, a different way you're going to set a boundary, a different way you're going to approach the situation. Uh, think about that and have that be your focus point. And if you want to share, we would love for you to share.